Good evening, I'm Haja Kartini Dewi Abdullah and welcome to World News Live from Radio Television Brunei in Bandar Sri Begawan and the top stories for tonight. Iran nuclear negotiations enter their crucial final day to agree on the outlines of a potentially historic deal with Iran to cut back its nuclear ambitions. Kuwait hosts an international donors conference for Syria with a pledge of $500 million in humanitarian aid. Iran and six world powers ramped up the pace at today's negotiations of a preliminary deal on the Iranian nuclear program as their self-imposed deadline approached, and both sides warned it was crucial to overcome differences that could wreck an agreement. The goal of the negotiations is to find a way to ensure that for at least the next 10 years, Iran is at least 1 year away from being able to produce enough fissile material for an atomic weapon. In exchange for temporary limits on its most sensitive atomic activities, Tehran wants an end to sanctions. Iran and the six powers have twice extended their deadline for a long-term agreement after reaching an interim accord in November 2013. They set a goal of securing a framework agreement by the end of March and a comprehensive accord with all technical details settled by June 30th. Even if a framework deal is reached by today's deadline, officials say it could still fall apart when the two sides attempt to agree on all the technical details for the comprehensive accord by the end of June. Meanwhile, Kuwait opened an international donors conference for Syria today with a pledge of $500 million in humanitarian aid as the UN issued its largest yet appeal for $8.4 billion in commitments this year for the war-ravaged country. Emir Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmad Al Sabah made the pledge at the start of the third annual gathering in Kuwait, which 78 countries and 40 international aid organizations are attending. According to UN figures, the civil war in Syria, now in its fifth year, has killed at least 220,000 people and displaced 11 million. The UN says $2.9 billion is needed in 2015 for Syrian people inside the country, and $5.5 billion is needed for those who have fled. Of the displaced, nearly 4 million have been forced to flee to nearby countries such as Lebanon, Turkey, Jordan, Iraq and Egypt, stretching resources there to the limit. Explosions lit up the sky above the Yemeni capital as Arab coalition warplanes pounded rebel positions in the heaviest raids yet of the six-day-old Saudi-led operation. Huge blasts were heard overnight in Sana'a when coalition forces hit a missile depot belonging to the renegade Republican Guard, which is loyal to former strongman Ali Abdullah Saleh. Besides the air campaign, Saudi Arabia also imposed a naval blockade of Yemeni ports to prevent its rebels from rearming. The missile depot blast rocked the southwestern district of Sana'a, and flames billowing from the site were seen by residents across most of the city. At least 9 of Yemen's 21 provinces have been targeted by airstrikes, preventing the rebels known as Houthis from reaching Aden, the former capital of the once independent south, where President Abid Rabu Mansur Hadi declared a temporary capital after fleeing rebel-controlled Sana'a. The move to block ports appeared aimed at preventing the rebels from rearming and comes after the coalition achieved full control of the skies and bombed a number of rebel-held airports. Meanwhile, both the Arab coalition and Houthi rebels have blamed each other for the death of dozens of people at a camp for displaced people hit by Saudi-led airstrikes in northwest Yemen yesterday. The Saudi military said the kingdom was seeking clarification on the incident. State media said Saudi planes were responsible for the death of at least 40 people at the Al-Harath camp, but Yemeni's foreign minister said artillery strikes by Houthi rebels were to blame. It said the dead include women and children. The camp has been housing Yemenis displaced by the conflict between the Houthis and the central government since 2009. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, said 200 people were also wounded in the bombing. Iraqi forces have retaken the Salahuddin provincial government headquarters in Tikrit from the IS jihadist group, a significant advance in the battle to recapture the city. The Badr militia said members of the Popular Mobilization Unit's pro-government paramilitary forces, dominated by Iran-backed Shiite militias, took part in the fighting after some froze offensive operations last week in response to US-led airstrikes. It is the most significant advance in Tikrit since pro-government forces launched an operation to retake the city early this month, their largest since IS led an offensive that overran much of the country's Sunni Arab heartland last June. Iraqi military also had retaken a hospital in southern Tikrit as they progressed towards the center of the city. Iraqi troops were seen fighting in the area around Tikrit General Hospital yesterday, where they believed IS militants who controlled the city were sheltering. The military's three-pronged offensive is making slow progress as it attempts to take the city because of booby traps and suicide bomb attacks. Activists say Syrian government forces have fired surface-to-surface missiles and conducted airstrikes on the rebel-held northwestern city of Idlib, killing more than a dozen people. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and the local coordination committees said the night strikes killed at least 14 people. The attacks come amid fears that the government is preparing to retake the city that it lost on Saturday. Opposition fighters celebrated the capture of Idlib. A Syrian military source had accused Turkey of helping the rebels to stage the assault on the city. The fall of Idlib marks only the second time the Syrian civil war that Damascus has lost control of a provincial capital. The first was Raqqa, which the IS group has turned into the de facto capital of its self-declared caliphate. The capture of Idlib by several factions led by the Al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front underscores the growing power of extremist groups in Syria, which now control about half the country. Now that the city is in the hands of rebels, many residents fear that troops will retaliate harshly. Thousands of workers at a major factory in southern Vietnam went on strike on the fifth day today to protest over social insurance cover, in rare show of labor unrest in a country positioning itself as a future Asian manufacturing powerhouse. The employees are disgruntled about a social insurance law taking effect from 2016, which restricts the scope of entitlements for a lump sum payment if they leave. Witnesses in the industrial suburbs of Ho Chi Minh City said hundreds of workers marched peacefully inside and outside the factory owned by Po Yuan Vietnam, a footwear maker for firms that include Nike Inc. and Adidas, and brands like Lacoste, Converse and Reebok. The factory, which employs close to 80,000 workers, is controlled by Chinese shoemaker Yue Yuan Industrial Holdings Limited, a subsidiary of Taiwan-listed Po Chen Corp. The strike is another blow for a factory that was among dozens hit by anti-China rioting last year during a maritime diplomatic row between Hanoi and Beijing. It comes as Vietnam strives to lure big firms with its cheap labor, tax breaks and its looming accession to free trade agreements FTA with its biggest export partners. And finally to Spain, where police arrested 2 young teenagers and 2 adults early today who were allegedly about to travel to Syria to fight with jihadists. The minors aged under 16 and a couple were arrested in a raid of a property in Badalona near Barcelona, along with 2 other suspects, one a woman. The Spanish Interior Ministry said that a brother of the teenagers had already traveled to Syria after being recruited by jihadist groups and died last year. The ministry added that they were due to travel today through Morocco to Turkey and from there on to Syria with the full knowledge of those close to them, including their mother. That wraps up tonight's edition of World News. Thank you for being with us. Have a pleasant day and good night. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.